Gentlemen, welcome to this afternoon's next session entitled Ocean Solutions, Coordination and Collaboration for Ocean-Based Mitigation and Adaptation. My name is Richard Delaney. I am the president of a nonprofit organization called the Center for Coastal Studies in Massachusetts, but I'm also a member of the board of directors of the International Coastal and Ocean Organization, which is closely affiliated with the Global Ocean Forum. So thank you all for being here today. We have a very distinguished panel, and I'm anxious to get on to hear their remarks. I'm very happy to be part of a panel that is talking about solutions. We have heard a lot about the problems facing the Earth and the oceans through climate change, so this will be refreshing. Each speaker will have 7 minutes to offer some initial remarks, and then we'd like to engage with you in a give and take with the panelists and yourselves, and I think that will be a challenging discussion as well. But just a little bit of background on the topic before we get to the panelists. First of all, we all know the ocean has slowed the rate of climate change over the last, well, since the Industrial Revolution by absorbing tremendous amounts of carbon dioxide, excess carbon dioxide that we as human beings have produced. However, it is reaching its assimilative capacity in many ways, and the results are pretty alarming. That cost to the oceans is that is warmed, they've acidified, they have lost oxygen, circulation patterns are changing, and sea levels are rising. That sentence alone probably should set off alarm bells and red flags for all of us. I mean, that is a existential threat if we've ever had one. And we all know that we are inextricably linked to the oceans. So that's why this session is so important. And continuing along those trends, those changes, not only threatens the marine ecosystem, but the future ability of the ocean to support life on Earth. That's pretty startling. Despite this, the ocean offers a range of key mitigation and adaptation opportunities for nations to combat climate change and to increase ambition on emissions reduction and to ensure that the ocean can be developed sustainably for the benefits it provides to people around the world. So that is the background for this panel. We have 5 panelists. I'll introduce them all in a minute, but they're all really strong advocates for ocean health. They've all committed to providing their scientific knowledge to inform policies and management decisions. And my organization really, back in the United States, encourages proactive scientists who bring their knowledge of the ocean to bear on solutions, which you'll hear today. So I will ask you to hold your questions till we get to the end of the first part of the session, and then we'll open up for questions at the Q&A. So with that, I'd like to introduce, and I'm honored to introduce Dr. Margaret Leinen, who is the director of Scripps Institute of Oceanography and the Vice Chancellor for Marine Science at the University of California, San Diego. She is an ocean biogeochemist and a paleo-oceanographer whose research includes study of ocean carbon cycling and the role of the oceans in climate. Dr. Leinen, please, we'll look forward to your remarks.
From here or there?
No,
from here, okay, great, thank you. As Richard pointed out, the CO2 that we put into the atmosphere and the climate changes that are happening as a result of it, both have changed the ocean profoundly with respect to its temperature, its acid balance, the amount of oxygen in the ocean. And that in turn has changed the very fabric of life in the ocean, its biodiversity and its ecosystems. And I want to concentrate a bit on the adaptation side of this question of solutions and adaptation. And it's essential for us to understand how biodiversity and ecosystems are changing in order to understand how much we have to adapt to and how we can adapt to that. But this has been an incredibly difficult challenge because determining the biodiversity of the ocean is so difficult. We can certainly count big things that we can catch, like fish, or big things that we can image, like marine mammals. But when it gets to the foundation of the ecosystem of the ocean, the microbes, the plankton, the microscopic organisms, it's almost impossible for us to do a census of those. And new developments that come out of biology and biotechnology have given us, just over the last 3 or 4 years, the ability to start looking at biodiversity in a totally remarkable way. Every life form in the ocean, from viruses to the largest marine mammals, contains or leaves behind biomolecules, DNA, RNA, and various measurements of those that we call omics. They can be analyzed in tissue, they can be analyzed in seawater, they can be analyzed in sediment. And the next slide. Oh, I'm sorry. Okay, I have it. So what's happened over the last few years is that we have had some experiments to be able to collect seawater, to analyze its biomolecules, and to determine how well we can identify everything that's in it. And a new interdisciplinary international collaboration has been endorsed as a program of the UN Decade of Ocean Science for Sustainable Development. It's called the Ocean Biomolecular Observing Network, OBON. And the network will use these biomolecular technologies to detect, monitor, and understand life in the sea. Not just the big things, but every trophic level, to determine how life is changing in response to climate and other anthropogenic impacts, and to relate these to societal impact. Most importantly, we'll be able to understand what we need to be adapting to and what the tools are that we'll have for that adaptation. So a liter of seawater has in it biomolecules from all of the organisms in that seawater, regardless of their size, as well as all of the nucleic acids that have come from waste products of anything that's affected that water, as well as skin cells or other materials that have been shed. So that liter of seawater can give us the biodiversity of everything that's in it and everything that has affected it. This is really one of the most important new ways of looking at the biology of the ocean since we first started dragging nets through it and looking at organisms. So as I mentioned, this is a program of the Ocean Decade of the Decade of Ocean Science for Sustainable Development. There are almost 100 partners, from research institutes to government agencies to nonprofits, corporations. 38 countries are represented so far in establishing the network. And over the coming decade, we will build a coastal to open ocean multi-omics biodiversity observing system. We'll begin by putting biomolecular analyses into the existing long-term observation systems, conventional observation systems at the ocean, and expand that through projects that are now being proposed for campaigns as part of the Ocean Decade. We planned this effort from the start with representatives of users, marine conservation, marine resource management, policymakers, the private sector, and those and NGOs at both the national and subnational levels. We want to ensure that the information that we that we go out and collect and analyze is going to be fit for purpose for the sustainable development needs that we have. New instruments have also been developed that can autonomously sample water for this kind of analysis. And by the end of the decade, we expect to be able to not only sample, but analyze that water at sea. This will enable us to document biodiversity in virtually any ocean environment on Earth without the use of ships. We've also included a very complete data effort that takes advantage of both terrestrial and marine databases for omics data, and includes an initiative to develop techniques to be able to make this biological data useful together with physical data and information from programs like Argo. We also will be developing and transferring capacity through training programs and funded equipment programs supported by the development and aid agency groups to be able to develop this technology everywhere, not just in the developing world. So as I mentioned, there is a call for projects associated with this that's out now. It was released last month, and we're working with efforts to assist groups in proposing projects for OBON. So please contact us if you're interested. We really think that by the end of the decade, this is going to result in a transformation, a real evolution of our ability to put biological observation together with the great physics and chemistry that we already have. Thanks.
Well, thank you very much. Transdisciplinary, multidisciplinary science is really the key to a lot of what we're talking about, and that advance that you're talking about is taking it all the way down to the molecular level is going to be very exciting.
And developing it with users.
Exactly. So, and I apologize for my alarm going off. I didn't mean to be rude. That was, you did fine with the time. So the next panelist is Helen Findlay. Helen is a senior scientist at the Plymouth Marine Laboratory in the UK. She is a biological oceanographer at Plymouth Marine Laboratory, interested in understanding the effects of climate change and ocean acidification on marine ecosystems and the application of these effects of the effect of climate change on those systems and the ability to maintain a healthy, sustainable ocean. In particular, focus on the Arctic and Northeast Atlantic. So Helen, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, and thank you for inviting us to take part in this event today. It's my pleasure to speak to you today about ocean acidification and the global networks that have developed out of that, and how we're now using those global networks to look at local and regional solutions. So let's start just by making sure we're all on the same page. What is ocean acidification? The oceans naturally take up carbon dioxide from the atmosphere, and that becomes part of the marine carbonate system. The carbon dioxide reacts to become part of that marine carbonate system. And by doing so, they've taken up about 30% of the anthropogenic emissions that have gone into the atmosphere over the last 150 years or so. But too much too quickly results in a shift and an imbalance in that carbonate system. And that's resulting in the oceans becoming more acidic, a lowering of the pH, and a lowering of the carbonate ion concentration, which is resulting in them essentially becoming more corrosive to important minerals, calcium carbonate minerals that are fundamental for many organisms that build shells and skeletons like mollusks and corals. So the concern for ocean acidification arose in the early 2000s, really, when we were starting to think about how the oceans could actually enhance storage of carbon for us to actually help us mitigate against climate change. And the science developed and the concern grew, eventually resulting in the formation of the Global Ocean Acidification Observing Network, which is an international partnership formed in 2012 to really document the status and progress of ocean acidification, as well as understand the impacts of ocean acidification on marine ecosystems and societies. It also supports the forecasting through the development of marine models. So there was a recognition that this was a global problem, but actually this has local effects. And the global network has really allowed us to enhance our ability to collect data that's allowed us to provide the evidence that this is really a global phenomenon. You can see on the left-hand side of the slides that this is data from the Hawaiian Ocean Time Series, showing in black the rise in atmospheric CO2, the concomitant rise in the ocean CO2 in blue, and the decrease in ocean pH that's happened since the 1980s in this long-term time series. And the Global Ocean Network has allowed us, Global Ocean Acidification Observing Network has allowed us to use the data from across a number of countries to really show that this is happening all over the world and at very similar rates, although in some regions there are hotspots where acidification is happening much more rapidly. Not only have been able to observe changes in the chemistry, but the networks allowed us to share capacity, share development and training, and allow us to bring together experimentalists to look at the impacts of ocean acidification. So we've been able to take experiments, take organisms to the future to assess how they might respond to change. But more importantly, more recently, the technology is developed that's allowed us to observe biological change in these hotspots now we know they exist, where we can actually see and observe changes in the oceans today. So these are just a couple of examples where, for example, we can see pteropod shell dissolution in areas where we get periodic low pH at present day. Pteropods are fundamental plankton species that are snails that are part of the food chain, and fish species like salmon feed on these. We've seen things like larval crab dissolution in part of their mechanoreceptors and their shells, and we're seeing a loss of calcification rates in the Southern Ocean as just a few examples. So there's a continued need in this global effort to really understand what's going on and how to reduce the impacts. So now the Global Ocean Acidification Observing Network consists of around about 860 scientists from over 105 countries. It's grown massively, but more importantly, it's now split into regional hubs. So there's the global network, but within that we now have regional hubs, which allow us to take this global issue and to look at regional and local problems and speak to stakeholders to look at the solutions. I'm the coordinator for the Northeast Atlantic Hub, so I'm just going to use this as one of the examples. We were formed in 2018 to serve the European countries for the Northeast Atlantic region, and we really aim to bring together the scientists in this region. It's a very difficult landscape. There's lots of networks, lots of programs going on, and it was really clear to us that we needed to bring together the community to share our knowledge, share our data, and share capacity building. So some of the things that we've been working with really highlight this. So we're trying to bring together data on one platform that will allow us to provide evidence to local stakeholders. So working with national data centers is fundamentally important, as well as working with some of the big programs that are going on across Europe, for instance, the Integrated Carbon Observing System. We're working together to look at how we can improve and facilitate data being submitted to things like the SDG. There's the SDG 14.3, which is the target for ocean acidification. And there's the SDG 14.3.1, where we have to submit data on ocean pH. And it's, this network has allowed us to think about the best ways of allowing the data centers and the communities to actually get their data, connect up the data sharers, the data developers, and actually bring that data into the SDG process. The other thing we've been working on is really providing evidence to stakeholders and understanding their needs in terms of local communities. What is it that the aquaculture communities need? What is it that the shell fisheries communities need? And how does that local ocean acidification really manifest itself in these regions? And providing that scientific evidence to communities like OSPAR, where we can actually feed into their quality status reports for the region to actually provide that evidence to policymakers and communicate the knowledge. And working with people like the OA Alliance, where we can actually bring stakeholders and scientists together to actually think about how we can minimize ocean acidification impacts. So the idea really behind this global issue is that we can have this shared knowledge, this shared understanding, go out and bring capacity and work on autonomous new technology, the state-of-the-art technology, share that across not only our regional networks to understand our local stakeholder issues, but also then take that capacity through the global networks to countries and infrastructures that maybe weren't there before or didn't have that capacity before, allowing us to really try to aim to minimize the impacts of ocean acidification by reducing emissions, managing co-stressors, protecting and increasing habitats, and investing in science, partnerships, and educations. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Ellen. And it's really encouraging to see such an extensive, coordinated response to an issue that or threat to oceans that are, I'd suggest, maybe one of the least understood, but potentially one of the most devastating to the ocean ecosystems. So this is encouraging. I'm glad you're involved in it. Well, thank you. And again, following along the pre-established agenda, the next speaker is Mr. Tomohiko Tsunada, who is the Senior Research Fellow at the Ocean Policy Research Institute of the Sasakawa Peace Institute. After finishing his Master of Science at the Center for Climate Systems Research at the University of Tokyo, he joined the Mitsubishi Research Institute in 1998. He held the position of senior researcher, which he left in 2015. And although his research mainly focused on physical oceanography, his research interests also include ocean policy and science-based information sharing. He is also in charge of the program of the United Nations Decade of Ocean Science at OPRI for the Sasakawa Peace Foundation. So the floor is yours, Tomohiko.
Thank you, Chairman. I'm Tomohiko Tsunoda of Ocean Policy Research Institute of OPRI in Japan. First, I would like to express my appreciation for giving me this great opportunity. Since 2000, OPRI has worked as Japan's only think tank devoted to ocean policy. We conduct projects in various fields on the ocean. Today, I'd like to talk about how the UN Decade of Ocean Science can contribute to the climate change challenges from the perspectives of ocean education. Under the United Nations, there is a network called UN Ocean. In addition, the ICP meeting has been held every year. Themes over the last 5 years include marine debris, climate change, decade of ocean, and sea level rise. However, comprehensive discussion on the ocean in the UN system so far has been very limited. And so the UN Ocean Conference held in support of the implementation of SDGs 14 has played an important role. And scientific contributions are also seen in separate fields such as climate change, biodiversity, and fisheries. They play an important role in connecting the law and organization. Recently, for example, there is a joint effort between IPCC and IPBES, and a similar kind of collaboration is required in ocean science. In this context, UN General Assembly proclaimed the UN Decade of Ocean Science in 2017. And from this year, initiative with a particular focus on the ocean will be pursued in the aim of realizing various SDGs, especially SDG 14, Life Below Water. The Ocean Decade sets 7 outcomes. Today, I'd like to focus on the inspiring and engaging the ocean. the last of the 7 outcomes of the ocean decade and introduce our effort in ocean education. First, I would like to introduce Japan's activities towards the ocean decade. The Japanese government held a workshop to study content of the implementation of ocean decade in Tokyo in the summer of 2019 to enhance discussion in the Pacific and Asia region. In addition, we established the National Committee this year and published a book of Japan's initiatives. I'm doing the focal point of the National Committee of Japan. And this slide shows how the ocean decade can contribute to the sustainable ocean, including the provision of scientific information as a basis of considering adaptation to climate change. And regarding the outcome, inspiring and engaging ocean, it aims for a society where people understand appeals of ocean through a variety of dialogue and act to use and protect it. This slide shows a breakdown of the 48 initiatives we have published, including efforts to combat climate change, such as the conservation of coral triangles. We have also included initiatives towards inspiring and engaging the ocean, which include ocean education. This is the inspiring and engaging page of the actual book of Japan's initiatives. I would like to introduce the Pioneer School project, which our foundation is conducting with Nippon Foundation and University of Tokyo. This project provides support for ocean education for elementary school to high school students in nearly 200 schools. This figure on the left shows the location of 72 elementary schools in 2017. Schools of each area of Japan are engaged in ocean education. And the right figure shows the distance of the school from the coastline. Many schools are located near the coast, but there are also schools that are far from the coastline. And this figure shows the number of schools by hand-on activities, themes classified by coastline to school distance. Blue bar corresponds to school near the coastline, and green bar for the school more than 5 kilometers away. We can see the biological observation is being carried out in many schools. And for marine litter, we can see the schools near the coastline are mainly engaged in these activities. Even in schools far from the ocean, efforts are being made to prevent baggage from going out to the ocean by cleaning up the rivers. Although the Pioneer School project is still in early stage, we hope that their effort will increase the number of the children who will be responsible for ocean science in the future. As for the ocean decade, IOC UNESCO and our foundation are co-hosting an event on Saturday morning at the Japan Pavilion, focusing on the effort of Asia-Pacific region. Please come and join us on Saturday. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Tomohiko. And it's really encouraging to see the Ocean Policy Research Institute with such an ambitious agenda, but especially including young people. That last section that you talked about education reminds all of us that, well, we don't have to be reminded. There is another generation or two behind most of us who are going to be taking care of the oceans and become the stewards and need to be well educated. So I'm happy to see you are including that sector, that component in your program. So thank you. And speaking of a youth organization and the next generation, that is a nice segue, I might say, to the next speaker, whose name is Dr. Jack Laverick. Jack is a founding member of the Youth for Ocean Forum and a marine scientist himself. He has been a consultant or the consulting scientist on 4 children's books on marine topics and is an author on over 20 scientific articles and reports. Jack got his PhD from the University of Oxford in 2019, studying tropical coral reefs, and has recently relocated right here to Glasgow at the University of Strathclyde. So we're pleased to have perspective from the next generation on oceans and climate. Jack, please.
Thank you, Richard. And hi, everyone. I'm about to step out of my comfort zone a bit and talk to you not about technical details, but put myself out there personally. 8 weeks ago, I became a dad. I'm 28, and by the time we get to 2050, my son will be the same age. There's nothing like impending parenthood to make you think about your childhood and where we've been heading. I grew up in a landlocked part of the UK, but despite this, I've always loved the ocean. I used to go and visit my great-grandfather on the coast, and I'd go rock pooling and looking for seals. My parents would tell me about the amazing things in the ocean, and when I was sick, I would watch Blue Planet. Like lots of kids, I wanted to grow up to be a marine biologist. I worked hard in school, and I achieved my dream. I worked my summers and scuba dived on my first coral reef with an NGO when I was 18. I couldn't help shake a sense of disappointment. I didn't see a single shark, and the coral cover was low. I have since seen good coral reefs, but I've also seen others which are nothing like those described to me as a child. I remember meeting a retired couple on a dive boat, returning to the location of their honeymoon. They told me how these reefs were a shadow of their former selves, and I could see the damage repeated extreme weather events had done to them over time. When I came to celebrate getting my PhD in coral reefs, of course I decided to mark it with a diving trip. Again, my plans were slightly too late. I arrived just after a mass bleaching event, which had killed stretches of the reef. I now work on mathematical models of Arctic ecosystems and their fisheries based on data collected from the real world. Every day, I'm faced with model predictions showing retreating sea ice under climate change and how this will impact on livelihoods from fishing. I also see the maths in front of me showing how reorganizing the food web without ice means losing the species which depend upon it, such as polar bears and seals. I then think about what I would tell my child when they grow up. I was a 1-year-old when the first COP was held in Berlin. My childhood was filled with stories of the wonders of nature, which inspired my choice of career. Do you know what's happened since I was a baby learning to walk? The amount of fossil fuels in the atmosphere and the carbon dioxide that's come from that has doubled, and that's not even including other more damaging greenhouse gases. I'm only 2 years out of school, and the environment has been under assault for the whole time. Do I tell my son amazing stories of whales, polar bears, coral reefs, huge schools of fish, and mysterious unknown parts of the deep sea? Or do I say these things used to exist because the reefs bleached and were covered in seaweed? The icebergs are melted and the polar bears starved. We ate all the fish and we replaced them with plastic. I'm here to offer a young person's view and a young person's sense of ambition. I say we need to go harder and faster on climate issues. Net zero by 2050 means 28 more years of causing damage. It means my lifetime again of adding emissions into the atmosphere. We're seeing the damaging effects of climate change right now. I don't understand why we think 3 decades more of damage is sold as ambitious. It's down to us adults to transform things now over the next 10 years. If we only aim to inspire young people to live a different future, we'll have to wait another 20 years for them to start, no matter how courageous they may be. I've seen evidence of how much things have degraded during my youth, and I'm not sure I can bear the same for my child. The best thing we can do is to avoid producing greenhouse gases wherever possible. The less we add into the atmosphere, the less damage we cause. Then we need to talk about the cleanup. carbon sequestration needs to be seen as a tool to clean up the pollution we've already released. As long as we think of these two things in terms of balancing emissions, we're talking damage limitation at best. We can think grander than that. I want my son, by 2050, to be in a world which is better, healthier than the one we currently have. You know what? Time has actually marched on. We're not just thinking about future generations now. I would like to retire in a world that's healthier than the one we currently have. I would like those with the know-how and the money are desperately needed to engage in the world's largest cleanup operation. Don't be afraid to act on your own and smash through targets. Show the rest of the world that it's possible to fix this, and those who hesitate might change their minds and join you. That's the kind of climate action that would actually get me excited. The ocean has got to be central to all of this. Though I've spoken about the marine disappointments in my life so far, I do still love the ocean. There are still amazing ecosystems which function, providing us with oxygen, food, shelter, and for me, above all, a sense of wonder. The ocean has an amazing capacity to regenerate. Despite literally burning through whales for a time, curbs and whaling have ended up leading to a resurgence in populations. Though corals bleach, if it's for a short time, they do recover and live on. Often, all that is needed for recovery to happen is for us to stop damaging the ecosystems. For those which are more stubbornly scarred, there are committed people who are walking towards ecosystem restoration, towards repairing our damaging past. The benefits of a healthy ocean should not be underestimated. Seagrass meadows and mangrove forests are among some of the most effective carbon sinks that we have, locking material in marine sediments. The sheer volume of water in the world's oceans has also acted as a buffer to CO2 emissions through direct absorption and has redistributed heat around the world's weather systems. We would not have the weather we enjoy up here in Glasgow without the sea. For those of you who came today, I'm excited for what you can learn about the ocean and how we can work with it to tackle climate change. There are people here who are knowledgeable and enthusiastic about this mission, and that will be the key to a better future for all of us. For young people wanting to make a difference, please look at the Youth for Ocean Forum's Young Ocean Advocate Programme. For those who already hold the levers for power, please strive so that in 28 years we can be talking about the progress we've made in repairing our natural capital and rejuvenating the oceans, rather than simply stopping having made things worse. Thank you.
Jack, thank you so much for your inspirational remarks. Thank you for your call to action. Thank you for not just a youth perspective, but a perspective that we all have to adopt and remind ourselves. So I hope you have a chance to write many, many more children's books and influence another generation of ocean champions. Thank you. All right, our last panelist is Mr. Tiago Pitta y Cunha. He is the Chief Executive Director of the Oceano Azul Foundation. Tiago is currently I'm sorry to repeat myself, Tiago is the CEO of Oceano Azul Foundation, which is a philanthropic organization exclusively dedicated to ocean sustainability, based in Portugal, but aiming at acting internationally. He was a member of the General Council of the University of Lisbon. He was a counselor for environment, science, and marine affairs to the former president of Portugal. He was awarded a 2016 European Citizens Prize by the European Parliament for his actions dedicated to promote ocean governance in the United Nations, in the European Union, and in Portugal. Tiago has been active, as you can hear, for many years, and we appreciate his philanthropy and his involvement in supporting science that makes a difference. So the floor is yours, Tiago.
Thank you very much, Richard, for such warming introduction. I have to say that it feels very familiar to sit here, and allow me to say, because we've been on these COPs for many years. But I have to say that this year, I kind of have a sweet and sour feeling. Sweet, of course, because we are able to meet each other again, which is absolutely great. But sour because it's the first time that we are not meeting with Biljana Sinsin, which has been absolutely a key leader many years before the declaration of the Ocean Climate Nexus in pushing for that nexus. And I think we all owe her a lot, and I think that we will remain with that feeling, and that's the sour part of this COP. I also like to say a word of commend of the ROCA report, the Roadmap for Ocean and Climate Action, which I would recommend of everyone to read because I think it's the most complete report we could find of everything that happened since the last report on the arena of ocean and climate deliberations, on what so many of us have been doing. And of course, it's a report that was somehow built by many of the people that are in this room, that was drafted by people in this room, and also special word for Miriam, of course, for coordinating all that as well. I was told I had 7 minutes, and we are talking about ocean solutions, so I thought I would come with 7 solutions. There are many more, but I thought that I could probably spend 1 minute per solution and come up with 7 solutions. We all know, especially now that it's growing, this ocean climate dialogue is growing, we all know that a healthy ocean will help us fight climate change. A deteriorated ocean will aggravate the problem and is not going to allow us to fight climate change. So what can we do for the ocean that is essential to keep the ocean as a fighter for climate change? And of course, my first solution is to finish what we have started a long time ago. And I'm referring to the High Seas Treaty, which has been, as you know, on the making within the United Nations for many years, more than a decade now. And that, I'm afraid to say, that is probably now a trademark for the lack of ocean action. And if we want to see ocean action moving forward, we definitely need to see a robust BBNJ being adopted at the United Nations. We hope that that will happen soon. This is going to be very important for the high seas, for biomass and for biodiversity, marine. A second issue is also continue on this very important issue of the removal of biomass from the ocean. It's fisheries, of course. We cannot stop emphasizing how much we need to change the way we look at fisheries and the way we look into wild fish for food security. That's a step we have to achieve, we'll have to make, and there are important solutions that can be done. Of course, one of them, a lot of us are also fighting for that at this moment, is to stop subsidies for harmful fishing within the World Trade Organization. And we are proud that Oceano Azul Foundation has aligned with the campaign for Stop Harmful Fishing Subsidies. Then, of course, I would like also to call upon this Rise Up for the Ocean, which is a call to action, which Oceano Azul was also involved in promoting together with Ocean Unite and the Oak Foundation, and which says that we should look into territorial waters as essentially waters that should be dedicated to artisanal fisheries and not anymore so much for industrial fishing. Because that would be very important for many reasons, of course. They would be important for biomass and for and for biodiversity, especially on very sensitive ecological ecosystems, which are the most powerful for carbon sequestration. And also, of course, it would be important for coastal communities, for indigenous peoples, and so that's something that could be developed as a possible solution also to contribute to healthy oceans. Thirdly, still important for biomass, of course, is the known 30 by 30. 30% of marine protected areas, high and fully protected by 2030. But for this, I think that what's important now is to move into a plan of action to make this happen. We cannot just continue with this mantra until 29. We need to have targets, interim targets, before we get to 29. So if we are serious about getting to 30 by 30, we should at least be asking for 20 now that we are at 22, and try to have, for instance, 25 by 25. That could probably give us the comfort that we would get there. A fourth solution, of course, is to move up with the nature-based solutions, the marine nature-based solutions. We all know what it is. We all know how important it is. And this is where we connect to the ocean, the science for ocean, the ocean science decade. A lot can be done in the next 10 years in science, helping us to monitor, provide indicators, quantify the contribution of marine sensitive ecosystems for carbon sequestration. And that's where I think we can do a very good job in the next 10 years. The fifth, I would say, of course, that also implies restoration of marine ecosystems, and so one plays with the other very well. The fifth action we would argue for is, of course, to complement nature-based solutions with economic-based solutions. So look into an agenda of the blue economy that will contribute not only to decarbonize our oceans and seas, but to decarbonize our societies, our economies, as you know, by investing in renewable energies for energy security, clean shipping for transport security, and sustainable food from the ocean marine proteins for food security, which would actually be part of the solution by removing CO2 from the water, like with algae or bivalves, and not being part of the problem. Of course, that for this agenda to go forward, we will need ocean impact finance. So the blue financing comes here, and that's also a very important hook in this fifth recommendation. The sixth would be the question of pollution. We all recognize that we haven't managed to win the battle of pollution. We are losing it in industrialized countries in relation to eutrophication. It's still growing in our coastal areas. So we need to see if the international community could do something more on pollution. The GPA, Montreal GPA, Global Program of Action of '95 is really in the past. We have this Nairobi initiative now on plastic, but we would really need to look also at nutrients, chemicals, and pharmaceutical pollution of our waters. It would be very important if this could be the next thing as well, in terms of international community, to move into a kind of a agreement on that area. And finally, of course, in order to make all this possible, and this would be probably the seventh recommendation, seventh solution, we do think that the ocean crisis is so deep and so vast at this moment that we will need by mid-decade to have a commitment by the international community to address these issues if they were not addressed before, and other issues as well. We will probably need, and we hopefully would have that at the highest possible level. In the Oceano Foundation, we keep dreaming and we keep speaking about and advocating a heads of summit and government meeting for oceans. That would be, in a way, a kind of a Paris Agreement for the oceans by mid-decade. This is what we wanted to bring as possible ocean solutions. Richard, thank you very much for this opportunity.
I like the seven. I like it laid out nice and clearly. 7 actions. That's what this panel is about. And you do your number 2 point, Tiago, about government subsidizing fisheries, especially destructive fisheries, is important. I don't know, maybe you do know the total number of dollars that collectively governments use to subsidize fisheries, but you remind me of another action that should be happening right here at COP26, which is our government leaders removing the $400 billion of government subsidies that go to the fossil fuel industry that fuels climate change, that hurts the fisheries and the whole cycle. That's my hope for what can come away from this meeting. Those subsidies are not needed, and they've just been there forever, and they end up having the fossil fuel industry giving them undue extra control of our government processes too often. But there's a nice parallel between what's happening in fisheries, unfortunately, and the fossil fuel industry. So thank you all again to all our panelists. I want to I'd like to introduce my co-partner co-moderator here, Dr. Peter Ricketts, who is the President and Vice Chancellor of Acadia University in Nova Scotia. He had to sit up front here. We're limited a number of people that can be at this table. Peter, yes, that's a good idea. Thank you. You're welcome. And so we're going to hopefully moderate some questions from the floor. And I don't know exactly how that happens. Is there a microphone? Oh, there's a microphone. So please, just come up to the mic if you have a question for anybody. Yes, Carol?
Oops. Destroy the mic straight away. Thank you very much for a really interesting session. I'm Carol Turley from Plymouth Marine Laboratory. I have a question for Margaret about the OBOM program. You said that all the biomolecules, the RNA and the DNA, are in the water and that you can test this. You also alluded to the fact that you can also capture products from the organisms that were in, which implies that you can actually look back in the past for the organisms that might have passed through that water. How far, is this a timeline that you can trace back, and how useful would that be in terms of looking at biodiversity that's present now in your bottle or in your sampling? How big does that sample have to be to capture not only large organisms and their biomolecules, but also their past occurrence, influence on that water? And could it be really useful in biodiversity? Thank you.
It's a great question, Carol. And one of the very active areas of research is looking at what controls how persistent the DNA is, how quickly it degenerates or decomposes. And, is that controlled by temperature? Is it controlled by acidity? That still is something to be determined. If you think about the sediments, however, and you can certainly do this in sediments, that's a place where you have a continuum between DNA that is generated now and in the sediments and nucleic acids that have been accumulating there for some time. And that's a place where you could use isotopic analysis to start unpacking that whole spectrum.
Great, thank you for that question. Anyone else from the audience? Yes, please, anyone can come up to the mic and we'll form a little line right there.
There's another mic on the other side.
Oh, and there's, yes, and I see there's another mic on the other side as well, if that's more convenient. Please, sir.
Thank you. First of all, thank you very much to all the panelists for the wonderful presentation and the work that you do. This is a question for Tiago. So we spoke of the importance of combating pollution and establishing protected areas in marine protection. And I wanted to ask you if, so I work in the Leave It in the Ground initiative, and we are mapping fossil fuel reserves around the world. And we noticed that a vast proportion of them are offshore. So what do you think would be the value of introducing fossil fuels in the conversation of marine protection, and if there is any possibility, in your opinion, that that would help establish and possibly expand protected areas? Thank you.
Diego?
Shall I?
Yes, please.
Well, thank you very much, and thank you very much for your question. I think that for many people, fighting climate change is also very much about working towards leaving fossil fuels where they are. And so in terms, of course, of decarbonizing our ocean and waters and our societies and economies, that's what should be the main goal. Of course, we are in a transition period. We have very little time to do that. We have this 1.5 degrees report in our heads like a sword. We have less than 10 years probably to operate this energy paradigm shift. And this is what all of us should be pushing for. Rise Up for the Ocean, this blue call to action that intends to be delivered to the United Nations conference that is going to take place in Lisbon in June of 2022, clearly states that we should not allow more offshore oil and gas exploitation. That is new, and we should think of phasing out the existent one. Thank you.
Good. Thank you. I don't see a hand. One more from the audience, then I'm going to turn to my co-moderator for a minute, but please.
Thank you. Assuming that we will be able to reduce the annual burden of greenhouse gases in the atmosphere, it means that, according to my understanding, that the pressure or burden on ocean will start to decline. So have you any idea at what time that creates a situation in which oceans start to recover themselves?
That's probably for the science.
I think that's for either Margaret or Helen or both of you. Would you like to take a shot at that, Helen?
Take a shot. So the oceans they have a long memory, really. So they can take hundreds of thousands of years, really. We're already committed in terms of things like ocean acidification to at least the end of the century. If we manage to stick to 1.5 degrees, then we will see a small decline in ocean pH, and it will still take hundreds of thousands of years to get back to a pre-industrial level. The same is true for temperature. If we think that 90% of the heat's been taken up by the ocean, that heat takes a long time to work its way around the oceans and exchange again with the atmosphere. So the oceans have a huge long memory, and so unfortunately we are locked into a commitment already. So we really need to be working towards minimizing those impacts to the most extreme.
Thank you. Margaret, would you like to add to that?
No, that was great.
That was fun. Thank you. All right, while we're waiting for someone else to come up to the mic, I'm going to ask Dr. Ricketts if he would have a question or two for the audience.
Well,
for the panel, sorry.
I would like to thank the panelists. I think it was fantastic to hear, all of the things that they're doing in the different areas of expertise to build networks and collaborate to bring solutions together. But I guess one of the things I'd like to open up the discussion is thinking about how we accelerate the level of collaboration across all of the different areas of expertise that each of you have. And I say this just because of this sort of sense is growing. Well, not growing. It is an immediate sense of urgency and almost sort of catastrophe. And I think back, to when I first taught a course on coastal management in 1979, which tells you how old I am. But and I think back, that's over 40 years ago, and yet we're still groping with this idea of how we collaborate and integrate policy decisions to make sure that things actually get done on the ground. And part of, I think, the challenge of the COP today is it's really the result of a tragic disconnect between science, policy development, decision makers, political action, and commitment by government. And my question really is driven by Dr. Laverick's comments, because I'm a university president now, so I see every day young people, saying to me, "What the hell have you done? What is our future?" We introduced at Acadia University last year a strategic plan that was called Transforming Lives for a Transforming World, because I said in a speech that this generation of students is the first generation ever to enter university and know that in the 3 or 4 years' time when they'll graduate, the world will have physically changed. Because normally the rate of change in the world is kind of incremental. You don't really think about the world changing physically over such a short period of time. But our current students do. And they know that the change is actually for the worse. So how are we going to accelerate this, and what are we going to do? You know, in 18 years' time, Dr. Laverick, is it your son or daughter?
Son.
Yeah, your son's going to be going to university. I'll reserve a place for him at Acadia if you'd like to come to Nova Scotia. But you know, what is the world going to be like when Dr. Laverick's son comes to university? And he's not going to say, "What the hell have you done?" He's going to be actually in the midst of a huge mess, unless we can accelerate the level at which science, policy, management, and political will come together and actually take action. So I'd be interested in just hearing some comments just down the row as to what you feel is the best thing we could do to come out of this COP with that kind of acceleration of actually getting things done.
Great, thank you. Margaret, you want to start?
Sure. I think that you know, traditionally the COP has been focused on the agreements about reducing greenhouse gases, not quite as much on action to spur innovation. And I think the two have to go hand in hand. Marine trade is global trade, and it is entirely diesel-based now. Unless we do something about that, we're stuck. And I think that I really strongly believe in the innovative capability of our, especially of the young people. And we have to send the signals that allow business to make business decisions, to invest in innovation, invest in new technologies. And when we go back and forth between one COP and the next saying, oh, you know, it's this, it's that, you know, and we allow government not to send clear signals about that, as well as about addressing the difficult issue of emissions reduction, we don't give, we tie the hands of innovators behind them, because you need that investment to be able to you know, to spur the development. We have, I'm sure it's the same at your university, we have hundreds of students who have great ideas about new things that they would like to do, whether it's batteries or carbon sequestration, or you know, plastics that biodegrade when they're in salt water and sunshine. But for them to be able to have the investment to take that idea and really turn it into something requires action at the level of financial institutions and government. And I think we really need to demand more of that.
Thanks.
Great, thank you. Helen, would you like to comment on that?
I think for me it's about democratizing and sharing equality, and of being able to share data, share information, and build on the lessons that we've learnt in the more developed countries, and really providing that information to others at the forefront, to really be able to allow them to understand their own systems and provide solutions to their specific needs. So it's about equality for me. It's about really providing that platform where we can give people the opportunity to, like Margaret said, to provide those solutions, because they are out there. And like Margaret said, really, the funding and the platforms, if those are available and the incentives are there, I feel like 10 years ago I felt very much in that position, but I still feel optimistic, even though 10 years down the line I was saying the same thing 10 years ago. I still feel that there's opportunities now, and these things tend to build in a kind of exponential way. Given the opportunity, we can rapidly transform our societies if we want to. And COVID has shown that in many respects, in that we can act quickly if we want to. I think we just have to go through this COP and keep that momentum, keep that dialogue, keep the conversations, and not let that drop.
Great, thank you. Tiago, would you care to comment on the disconnect and the need for broader collaboration?
Well, just probably I would bring up one idea. The European Commission, as you, I don't know if many of you are familiar with, organized 5 mission boards to try to develop visions for 5 societal challenges that face Europe. And one of them is on oceans and water, which is very interesting that it's climbed now to one of the 5 main concerns of the European Union. And so the Mission Board on Oceans and Water tried to come up with a report that is called Mission Starfish 2030 report, which I think is a very progressive report and would recommend to everyone that could be consulted. And this report has 5 recommendations, but one of them very interesting is that it is necessary in Europe, in order for these all ocean problems that we're discussing to be somehow solved, we need to kind of bridge this gap, this emotional and knowledge gap between the citizen and the ocean. So this goes very much to what Tomohiko was also speaking here of ocean literacy and the idea that we need to make citizens understand much more how dependent they are of the oceans. And that's very interesting, I think, and that's also something that we need to move on. Just to finish, in this report, one of the targets is that all European countries should have ocean literacy by 2030 in the curriculum for children, and that's could be quite a step in the right direction.
Good, thank you. Tomohiko, would you like to comment?
And yes, thank you. And I've been participating in COP since COP22, and recently I feel more power of the youth strongly. And I talked about the ocean education, and climate change is definitely a near future issue, and the stakeholder for the future definitely is young people. And I believe we need a system that we can provide young people with a solid science-based and evidence-based approach. And the Decade of Ocean Science just began this year, called co-design and co-work, which is very important. We do the science with stakeholders, and I think this is important. Thank you very much.
Good, thank you, Tomohiko. Jack, any thoughts?
Sure. I kind of feel that by being last in the line, I should have had the chance to marshal the brain dump that's going on right now into something that makes sense. But I struggle with quite regularly with the idea that as a scientist, you can continue to keep going, keep on documenting in new and wonderful ways how we're continuing to make things worse and give more detail on how things may be getting worse. But I think that scientists have been striving for that for decades already as well, that we know things are bad. We could unite into new interesting interdisciplinary projects and report on how things continue to get worse. And I'm not convinced that will necessarily improve our lot right now. That's something which we've already tried for a while. So I think perhaps what we really need to do is to unify in a way which allows us to amass the huge amount of knowledge that has accumulated into a place that's digestible, present it to the people that are going to make the choices, and hope that we can convince them in a way to do something different and really understand what it is we're saying. And I totally appreciate that these COPs and these sorts of things are exactly what that's intended to do, is that link up between scientists and people on the ground and policymakers trying to get towards those better places at the end. And I struggle, and I think if we hadn't answered this, that'd be great. It could just move on and things would be rosy. But I think the problem is a lot of these decisions are very unenviable, and that policymakers can be worried that they feel stuck between a rock and a hard place, because if we do this, we trash the environment, but if we do this, then it's someone's livelihood, and I understand that tension. It's quite tough. Though some livelihoods will go anyway if the climate gets worse, so I don't know. It just sort of made me think of a light bulb moment with a conversation I had as a teacher in secondary school, and he was saying that you could choose to come into school. And I went, no, I can't. I have to be here. And he went, no, you have that choice. You come because you don't want to be put in detention, or you don't want your parents to be sent to prison for not having sent you, or all these other things. It's like the context in which these choices are made matters. And I think perhaps what we can be doing now as scientists is to really try and help smooth out those rough edges that will make some of these choices seem a little bit less scary and a little bit less lose-lose. So perhaps not me sat there recording again how another reef is bleached or something and this is getting worse, but instead try and be constructive and say, things are bad, we know it, but perhaps these things can make it better in a way that's not quite so hard to swallow. I think that's where we can really connect, whether it's social sciences, natural sciences, and again, sort of human behavior stuff. All this has to come together to make that possible.
Great, thank you, Jack. I don't see a hand out there, and I'm going to turn to Peter one more time. Then.
Yeah, was there somebody who wanted to
Oh,
say something?
was there someone? Yeah, okay, please.
Hi, thank you all. I'm Alicia Perez Porro. I'm the Deputy Director of our research center on ecology that focuses on climate change and biodiversity. And I think that more than a question, I have a request. We've been talking in all these events that science is key, science is important, all the work that scientists were doing is key on these negotiations, but it's really difficult for scientists sometimes to engage in these negotiations, to engage in these processes. We produce a massive amount of knowledge, but we don't get the training to transfer this knowledge to politicians, policymakers, decision makers. I think that curricula in universities really need to change to incorporate these changes, because we don't get trained to talk to policymakers, to negotiators. And this is key to be able to bring the knowledge where the knowledge is needed, and also create the spaces where we can talk collectively, face to face, about all of these things. The current way to engage with COP is through the IPCC, and how many scientists can be in the IPCC? They are mainly from the global north. They are mainly men. It is very difficult to access the IPCC, and it's the only channel to get to SBSTA and to get to the negotiations. So I think that we really need to make more room for more scientists, more diverse scientists, and to train the scientists to be able to engage in these conversations so we can all talk. That's my request.
I couldn't agree more. In science, we have a term I've been using called science interpreters, or proactive scientists, people who take their knowledge, like these fine people, and bring them to action, or to those who are decision makers and policy makers. Is there any quick reaction from anyone on the panel to that request? I think the reaction was everyone agrees with it for sure.
I think it's a great point, but you have the ability to talk with the electeds wherever you are. And so much of the important action that takes place at that level. Those are the people that are doing something as opposed to negotiating. And they desperately need your advice, and what you're working on is of deep interest to them. And that's a great way to affect this whole enterprise too.
Good. Well, I wish I could take more questions. This big sign, this big screen in front of me is saying no more questions, and we're running out of time. So, I think. Okay, come to the mic, and I think we'll get a dispensation for running overtime by a minute.
No, because the lady just said that we can all talk. I only can invite, and this is the idea of the people who started COP, and they are in our companies in Germany, that action is needed more than only science. And I want to only say, here we have a case. For example, the president of the Seychelles finished the 30% goal already in 2019. Danny Fowler was not re-elected anymore, not because of that, because of his very successful COVID strategy. Here is Alain. He's the project manager. It's a great project he started, Danny Fowler Foundation, to not talk only, but to give all those who have science the possibility to go directly in these projects and act and test what they think that they have in their labs. And the last 2 days, I only can say he was very appreciated by all the decision makers, because we need those doers who have a word and those doers who listen to science. Thanks.
Okay, thank you. Thank you. Appreciate that. So I just want to, in terms of thanking everyone here for their participation and the panelists, but also the organizations that co-sponsored this particular panel. I mentioned earlier the International Coastal and Ocean Organization in partnership with the Global Ocean Forum, but we also have the Partnership for Observation of the Global Ocean, the Plymouth Marine Laboratory, the Sasakawa Peace Foundation, and the World Ocean Network. All were co-sponsors that helped organize this. So a round of applause for yourselves and for all of them, and thank you for your attention.